Well, hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us for another Sounds Profitable Data Extravaganza, which we love to bring you here. And today we have a very special topic and a very special guest. I'm joined today by someone that you already probably know, the founder of Wondery and now the founder of Owl and Company, my friend Hernan Lopez. Hernan, how are you?
Very good. How about you, Tom?
I'm very good. I'm excited today to be talking about TV and film podcasts and companion podcasts and all the reasons why these things matter. And I'm sure that people watching this certainly know your name, certainly know what you founded and created with Wondery. And now you have a new company, Owl and Company, and something called Streamonomics. And you're talking a lot about not just podcasting, but about the attention economy in general and streaming and streaming TV and so on. What interested you in this particular aspect of the podcast universe, and how do these circles kind of intersect?
It really combines two of my passions in television and podcasting, and the third one, which is how to turn creative ideas into new ways of interacting with consumers and then ultimately turn them into revenue and enterprise value. And as many people know, before starting Wondery, I worked in television my whole career, most recently, right before Wondery at Fox International Channels. And we had the rights outside of the US to this great show called The Walking Dead. And one of the things that I found fascinating was at the peak around 2014 to 16, The Walking Dead was a Sunday night show in the US, was making 14, 15 million average minute audience. And then they decided to have essentially rewatchable show, a talk show called The Talking Dead, live right after it at 11 p.m. And that show got close to 5 million average minute audience, which was remarkable for a show at that time. Many very expensive high-end dramas would really want to have that level of an audience. And as I was thinking about how many other television shows have been made about one specific TV show, Watch What Happens Live is another example. There weren't that many. And when I went into the podcast space, I realized that podcasts were the ideal medium for passionate communities to talk about the shows that they love the most. Especially this became more and more important because many of the shows became more elaborate with more characters, with more storylines. There was a lot that was not said. There was a lot that was implied. So over time, the show owners themselves, the television networks, created the shows. For example, if you remember the Succession show hosted by Kara Swisher, in order to fill the gaps, to allow the creators and the actors and the directors to talk about what they felt during the shows. And podcasts were the ideal medium to that because you don't need 5 million viewers to make a show work from an economic perspective. You can make it work with tens of thousands of passionate viewers, whether the show is official or not. So when you told me that you had the data about what the television and film dedicated podcasts had in common, who are the consumers, what are they doing outside of podcasts, I thought it was an amazing opportunity to partner. And I'm thrilled to have sponsored the study, and I love the numbers that we're going to work through.
Hmm. So I've another question for you, and I'll give you my answer to give you time to think about it because we didn't talk about this. But
Mm-hmm.
um, what's your favorite or some favorite TV film companion podcasts? And I'll throw a couple out there and give you a sec. I was a big fan of the Chernobyl podcast that accompanied the HBO series. I thought that was really good.
Right.
I was a
Yes.
big fan of the Raised by Wolves companion podcast because you needed something to help understand that show.
Right.
It was a really, high concept sci-fi show, and you kind of needed that. But I also there's a podcast that Roger Deakins and his wife do called Teen Deacons. Roger Deakins, the legendary cinematographer, did many of the Coen brothers movies, Sam Mendes movies, Denis Villeneuve, Oscars and awards like crazy. Does this really interesting podcast with his wife where they talk about movies and interview other cinematographers and directors and stuff. And I don't know. I eat that stuff up.
I have to say it's obviously dependent on the show that you like. And I already mentioned the Succession podcast. That's one of the ones that I remember listening to every episode throughout the season and learning and picking up little things that I had missed perhaps in the television show that essentially made watching the next episode more enjoyable. And I think
Mm.
that's the goal of a lot of the podcasts that are created by the networks or the studios. They really want to make sure that the audience talks about it and they're more likely to enjoy the next episode of the show.
Well, let's go to the data because I think one of the interesting things about this particular project is, I'm intrigued by the ways in which TV and film topics can help to grow podcasting, can even help to bring people to the medium that are not currently consuming podcasting. But on the flip side, TV and film podcasts and that kind of content are also a way to help grow the streaming audiences for some of the shows that they're presenting and advocacy for those shows and we have that data and it's really compelling data. So let's go ahead and dive into it now, and then we'll come back at the end and talk about some of the implications for this. But this particular project, True Companions, we're calling it, the power of TV and film podcasts. It is a derivative of our most recent project, the podcast landscape. We fielded this towards the very end of August of this year. This is our large 5,000 plus person study of consumer behavior, listening patterns, media consumption, and so on. And this was done in partnership with Signal Hill Insights, who was our fielding partner on this. And the overall fielding was also supported by BetterHelp, NPR, ESPN Podcasts, American Public Media, and the SiriusXM Podcast Network, and of course, Ernan and Owl and Company for this particular project to make this possible. We thank you all very much. This particular data set is weighted to the US Census. It's projectable to the US population 18 plus. So I'm going to start with a really basic data point here. And I start with it merely to put the next slide into perspective. This is the overall consumption of podcasting in America. This is, if you look at the past week slice of the pie here and the past 30 days and add those up, that's about 55% of Americans 18 plus who say that they have consumed a podcast of some kind in the last month. Now, when you ask a hypothetical to the entire US population 18 plus, this is not just podcast consumers. We ask them for each type of podcast, how likely would you be to listen? The first response there, a podcast about a favorite TV show or movie, that's 53% of the American population 18 plus. That includes non-podcast listeners. That number is almost as high as the number of monthly podcast consumers, period, right? So a podcast about a favorite TV show or movie at 53%, a podcast produced by a favorite TV show or movie at 50, and then a podcast hosted by a favorite celebrity or creator at 47%. Obviously, in order for those numbers to be as high as they are, there are significant percentages of Americans who currently do not consume podcasts who have expressed an interest in this type of content because this type of content is universal. We grow up with movies, we grow up with TV, and so there is at least hypothetical interest in that. So if you look at that 53% who say that they would be likely to try a podcast about a favorite TV show or movie, what is the current monthly consumption of TV film podcasts? Well, it's 19%. Now, anytime you ask a hypothetical, you're going to get a much larger number than reality. That's just overclaiming. That's a part of survey research. But still, I think this is a tremendous opportunity for reaching people who are either currently not consuming podcasts or maybe haven't found that right podcast that they want to stick with, or maybe that second or third podcast. I wonder, and I'd be curious, Hernan, what your thought is on this. Are we lacking enough great content in this category, or are we lacking awareness of this content in this category, or is the answer both?
I think it's more likely to be the latter than the former. Podcasts are, of course, fragmented, and we talked many times about how discovery is one of the most meaningful challenges in the podcast space. The podcasts about the best performing shows or the most popular shows are going to be discovered first, but as television itself has become fragmented, the likely audience itself for different podcasts is going to be fragmented more. So I do think it's more a question about awareness than about supply.
Hmm. So, one of the interesting things to me about the demographics of the audience for TV and film podcasts is that I do think there's tremendous opportunity here to branch into some underserved demographics. If you look at the gender profile here, it's 56% men, 44% women, and that's fairly close to what the monthly podcast consumer gender breakup is anyway. But if you look at most recent statistics, moviegoers today going to the cinema actually lean female. And another kind of way to look at that, if you look at age, the current audience for TV and film podcasts is, it's very weighted towards 18 to 54, right? 22% are 55 plus. But look at the demographics of television. If you look at network and cable television, the demographics for network and cable television are they're overwhelmingly 55 plus. So it does seem to me that there is a tremendous opportunity there to bring current network and cable TV consumers into the podcast ecosystem if we can A, produce the right content, obviously, but B, find ways to make them aware of it.
I will actually correct my earlier answer. You're right that it's both, right? Especially
Yeah.
after look at this side. I think it's more discovery perhaps than supply, but you're right that both sides need to be tackled.
Yeah, and discovery is especially difficult 55 plus because you have to reach them where they are.
Right.
And I think to me, that's a tremendous opportunity for the networks because they already have them, at least in those, in that linear box, to begin to deepen that relationship. Something I found really interesting, and we've been covering with a lot of the data that we've put out from Sounds Profitable over the past couple of years. This is with the overall podcast consumer audience. When you think of a podcast, do you expect it to be audio or video? And what we have seen over the past couple of years is that the percentage who say they have to be audio only, that's gone down a bit, and the percentage who say they can be either has gone up. But what has not gone up is the percentage who say it has to be video only or it's usually video. So there is still, I think, a very robust and diverse expectation of what a podcast is, and that a podcast is generally audio. And when you look at this data by the TV and film audience, it's not incredibly different. And what I take from that, I think, is a positive sign for people who want to produce content, produce podcast content about TV and film. Just because the subject of your podcast is visual does not mean your podcast has to be visual. So that impediment does not have to be in your way if you want to create audio content about a visual medium, because the expectations of the TV and film podcast consumer are not markedly different from the overall podcast consumer, in that generally either usually audio or maybe either is what the expectation is here. Now, we asked a question of obviously the entire podcast consumer audience, but also the TV and film consumer audience. And interestingly, not a big difference here. We have certainly seen over the past several years the rise of YouTube as being the app that people are most likely to say it's what I use the most to consume podcasts. That has certainly accompanied the rise of video and podcasting, but it's also a significant audio app for people as well. We do know that a significant percentage of YouTube primaries, people who say they use YouTube the most to consume their podcasts, actually consume a lot of audio, either by minimizing the tab or putting another browser up or another app, et cetera. So it's multi-purpose here. But there's not a huge difference here in consumption between the general podcast user and the TV and film podcast user. So again, they're not an entirely different dog, but it does speak, Ernan, to the importance of YouTube in this entire conversation.
I think that's right, because YouTube has led the way over the last several years in increasing the audience of podcasts in video, as has been widely reported, but also in audio, not only through YouTube itself. People count listening on YouTube Music, typically as YouTube as well. And while Spotify is pushing to get people to watch more, YouTube has had the habit for longer and has a bigger install base in the US in total monthly active users. So those combined, those are the reasons why YouTube is leading. I am very interested to see, and I know we're going to talk about this at the end, how the entry of television streaming services, Netflix in particular, made an announcement recently, but Hulu and Disney Plus have made an announcement about offering podcasts about a month ago, how those new entries are going to change the dynamics.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, the recent deal between Netflix and Spotify. One thing that we have noticed in a lot of the podcast research that we have both we at Sounds Profitable have been doing, and also others, is the rise of the smart TV as the kind of media hub for a lot of people, especially true actually with older Americans, I think. So as podcasts are also getting consumed through smart TV, I think it kind of casts a different light on that Netflix Spotify deal. And you see that, I think, very clearly here when you ask people, what device do you use most often to consume podcasts? Smart TV is at about 9% here. But amongst those people, the app that they're using the most is overwhelmingly YouTube. And you can see the distant second here is Netflix. So in some ways, I think this is Netflix. It's maybe not top of mind for them, but I think it is also them staking another claim on being that button on the smart TV that people click on first.
I think if you take a step back, this plays into a broader narrative of YouTube making a concerted effort to get more viewership on television sets overall. That the share of television viewership in the US, according to the Nielsen gauge, is close to 13% of all viewership. And they've done that while at the same time continuing to maintain a strong viewership on television, on smartphones, which is still the primary device around the world. Now, what sometimes is less often reported is that people are watching television shows and clips and podcasts on TV sets on YouTube at night. There used to be the misconception that YouTube was just primarily a daytime phenomenon, and then at night people watch something else. And when you look at the numbers, you can see how Netflix and Hulu and all the premium streaming services will want to take some share of that behavior that is happening. You see here only 9% of people using smart TVs as a primary medium, but if you think that that's a relatively nascent behavior, I bet you the first time that you asked that question, Tom, the number was nowhere near 9%.
Very true. It was very, very small, and it's absolutely growing every year.
And I think that's a trend that we'll continue to see, especially now that Netflix is making a push. Obviously, they only announced 16 podcasts, but you can expect that that's the first the first toe into the space.
Yeah, and not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but one thing as an advocate for podcasting that excites me about that is that it's a way to encourage more, co-consumption of podcasts, which have historically been a fairly private endeavor, right, that take place
That's
between
right.
the earbuds. But I think certain categories, I do think television and film podcasts, certainly news and sports podcasts and things like that, I think are very conducive to being consumed by groups of people, by families, and it's the smart TV that I think is going to help enable that.
And that's exactly right. And then apropos of Hulu and Disney Plus, when they did announce their entry into the podcast space, which was, I believe, a little over a month ago, the first podcast they produced in-house was about only murders in the building, which is precisely the category that we're talking about.
So, one thing that we do know about television and film podcast consumers is that they are very good consumers of streaming media. This is a significant difference here, where we haven't seen differences before in how they consume podcasts. We do see differences in their video consumption habits. They're much more likely to be consumers of premium TV without ads. They're much more likely to be consumers of premium TV streaming with ads, and much more likely to be consumers of free streaming TV services. And this is all germane to some data that we're just about to show you about the actions that people take when they are exposed to or consume TV and film podcasts, which we'll get to in just a moment. But these are certainly the right people to talk to if you are in the streaming business. If you're in the TV and film business of any kind, the TV and film podcast audience are people that have already self-selected to potentially be your biggest fans and your biggest customers. This is a piece of data that I found interesting, and maybe or not, I'm reading too much into this. But every year we ask people what types of podcasts you consume, the types that are produced regularly, ongoing, the kind that are not necessarily regular but are ongoing, and limited series. And I think in recent years, limited series have struggled a bit. It's pretty hard to break a limited series unless it has a very strong lead in, which certainly we saw with This American Life leading it to Serial and then S Town. And then there, of course, Hollywood ways to kind of lead into a podcast as well, which I'm sure you can speak to. But the TV and film consumer is much more likely to say that they listen to limited series podcasts. And they're also more likely to say that they will search for another podcast when that limited series is over. And maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, Hernan, but I wonder if uh, this is a fertile audience to advertise limited series shows to, period. And I know in your history with shows like Dirty John and Dr. Death, that you know finding ways to advertise those shows potentially in other limited series that are being consumed about ongoing TV shows and ongoing films. Maybe this is a gateway into more limited series consumption. I don't know.
I do think that actually they both work with one another. There's if you think about the people who are more likely to enjoy a podcast about a television show, are the ones who want to get deeper into the narratives, the storylines, the story behind the story, what you don't see on screen necessarily. So I do think I was not surprised to see that there's a little bit more overlap between those kind of listeners. And again, I think that I agree with you that represents an opportunity to increase audience on both sides.
This is just we're about to get into the real sort of heart of I think the coolest data in this whole project. Uh, I know over the past few months, I've had some negative things to say about celebrity podcasts. I don't think a celebrity is necessarily a brilliant interviewer, for example. Some are, some aren't. But one thing I can tell you is that the appetite for hearing from celebrities is significantly higher with this audience. And I think also, I mentioned the Team Deacons podcast that I love so much. Uh, I don't just love hearing from actors. I also like hearing from directors, and I don't know. I'm the kind of junkie that rewatches a movie with the director's commentary on. I just did one of those last weekend because I'm weird like that. But clearly, this audience has a much higher regard for hearing from celebrities, and I think it's an important hook, especially when we go back to the fact that I think there are many fans of this type of content who are not currently consuming podcasts. So there is again, that's a bit of a difference here between the TV and film audience and the podcast audience in general. Um, Another thing about the TV and film audience is that they are wonderful ambassadors. They're not just ambassadors for TV shows and film shows. And I know I often get asked by people, what shows are you watching now? I'm looking for a new show. Well, those people are enthusiastic evangelists and ambassadors about podcasting as well. 68% of monthly podcast consumers say that they ever recommend podcasts to people in their social circle. That number with the TV and film audience is 79%. And I think, again, that's important for anybody in the entertainment industry, in TV and film and streaming TV, because this particular audience, again, is a self selected audience of potential evangelists for both podcasting, but also for the show in question, which is what we're going to get to now in the last few slides of this particular data set, which I think are incredibly cool. So, this is amongst people who say they've ever listened to a podcast. Which of the following types of podcasts have you consumed? A third say a podcast featuring interviews with actors or directors. And that is certainly the number one response here. Kind of tied for second in a three-way tie, a podcast that reviews TV shows or movies, a podcast about a specific TV show or movie that's not produced by its studio or network, sort of it could be a fan produced, a podcast about a specific TV show or movie that is produced by its studio or network, And then bringing up the rear here, a TV rewatch podcast, which, again, amongst the audience of people that have ever listened to a podcast, which is about three-quarters of the country, even that 17% is a fairly high number. So, Hernan, anything to make of this graph in terms of the content spread or and the opportunities that are available?
I don't see anything in particular that would lead me as a creator to say I should make more of X or Y. I think that consumers are going to respond to the collection of shows that resonate with them, with the shows that the podcast about the shows or movies that they like, that bring an angle that they haven't seen before, whether it is a rewatch or whether it does feature interviewed actors or directors. The most important thing to me is distinctiveness, uniqueness, and a point of view that you just can't get anywhere else.
This, I think, is an incredibly relevant graph for, I think, people in the streaming industry, especially. Which of the following best describes how you feel about podcasts that focus on specific TV shows or movies? And people could select more than one here. Helps me keep up with shows is number one here at 43%. Makes me want to tune into those shows more. More than one in three say that. Makes me want to watch similar shows. Again, great cross promotion opportunities here. Makes me want to watch the show for the first time because how people encounter a show in a podcast isn't necessarily through the front door. It might be a podcast that's not typically about that show that does an episode on a particular show and that draws people in, and makes me feel more connected to the stars. So there's absolutely an engagement here, but also a way to keep people watching, and also to recommend similar content. And as we saw before, gives people something to talk about when they talk about shows with their friends. And then finally, this is I think the coolest graph in the entire project. Which of the following actions have you taken after consuming a podcast about a TV show or movie? Talk to friends about it. This we've established before. This is an audience that is prone to evangelism and advocacy. Rewatched the show, searched for more info about the cast or show at 38%. Watched it for the first time. Again, people may not come through the front door for these things. Followed the cast on social media. And then at the bottom, but that's not a small number, at 16%, purchased a streaming subscription to watch the show. So this is again uh, going in through the side door in a way that people will be exposed to a show that they hear about on another podcast, discover that they need to subscribe to something, to Peacock or to Hulu or Netflix or something in order to get that, and have actually purchased a subscription to watch that show. So we do know that uh, I'm certainly intrigued by the ways in which TV and film podcasts can grow podcasting, but the reverse is also true, I think.
100%, and that number 16% is quite big, especially given that people are likely to start listening to a show uh, because they have watched it in the past, right? So if you don't have the streaming services, the service that has it, you're likely to not be a viewer of or a listener of that particular show. You may have watched in the past. So it's and secondarily, the number of people who already have a streaming service is higher today than it was at any point in the past. So that 16% number to me was surprisingly big and represents a big opportunity for marketing for any of the streamers.
Yeah, I always tell people that whenever I go through data like this, I look to the small numbers,
Right.
because the small numbers are the opportunities. They're the ones that people gloss over, and they're never really that small, right? And I think this is a very good example of that.
Well, if you people who read my column on Streamonomics know that the value of a new subscriber is so important for any streaming service. It's you get much higher lifetime economics from a new subscriber than you get from incremental hour of television of subscriber that you already have.
So I'm going to run through just six really quick findings from this to wrap it up, and then come back to ask Hernan a couple of questions because we have a marvelous opportunity to have someone skilled in both television and streaming and podcasting with us. So we'll get back to that. But just to wrap all of this up, TV and film It's already one of the top genres in podcasting. 19% of monthly podcast consumers are currently listening to TV and film. And over 50% of Americans are interested in this kind of content. So it's a potential draw to even grow podcasting, period, amongst people who have not yet made it a habit. The current audience for TV and film podcasts leans a bit male, much like the podcast audience in general. And it's pretty concentrated 18 to 54. And to me, this is a real opportunity, both on the film side, because, as I mentioned before, the majority of cinema goers are actually women, and the majority of television audiences, the average age is certainly over 55. So there's tremendous opportunity here, I think, to grow the medium in that way. Despite the visual nature of TV and film podcasts, TV and film podcast consumers are just as likely to see podcasting as an audio medium, or at least a medium that is flexible in terms of both audio and video. They are as likely to be using YouTube as anybody else, certainly not tremendously more so, but that's, I think, more a testament to how strong YouTube has become in podcasting overall. Companion and related podcasts to streaming TV shows could be a significant driver to streaming platforms. We saw very healthy numbers for recommending shows to others, and even for subscribing to a streaming platform in order to consume a show that people have heard about on a podcast. I think it's a natural way to promote both streaming shows and podcasting in general. This particular audience, this segment of humans, are natural advocates, they're natural evangelists. They tell people about shows, they tell their social circle about podcasts more likely than the average. So this is, I think, an admirable audience to court, with, I think, a lot of potential. And also, and this was maybe, some wishful thinking on my part, this is an audience that, by the nature of episodic consumption of TV and film, are already, I think, more acclimated to limited series, episodic limited podcasts. And this could be a gateway to introduce other types of content or other limited series to this particular audience, because they already have a predilection to consume that kind of content. So, want to thank Owl and Company, which, I have a question for you, Ernan, before we get to a little bit of a wrap up here. Um, so Wondery, which you founded, the
Mhm.
mascot was an owl.
Yes,
Uh, your new company is Owl and Company.
that's
And
right.
as someone who grew up in the woods of northern Maine, owls are terrifying. What's with the owls?
To some people, but to some people are exciting. There are a number of people that I've talked to over the years who love the owl. The owl has always been associated with wisdom and with seeing through the darkness and being able to see what when other people are asleep. And those are curiosity, right? And again, these are all mythical. Obviously, the owls don't necessarily they're not. We don't know whether they're intelligent or not, but it's what most people have associated with owls, and it's been a lucky mascot for me at Wondery and at Owl and Company.
I kid because I love the owl. I think,
Right.
if you're looking for a word of the day, kids, I think owls are avuncular. That's a good
Um,
word.
when I
Um,
was looking, though, I should say I was looking at the visuals for the owl, and I played with a number of tools, in particular Mid Journey. There were some scary looking owls and some cute looking owls. So if you look at my website, you'll find that obviously we portray the cute looking one.
I think you did a good job with the owl.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I want to wrap up here with just sort of a couple, action-oriented kinds of questions, I think, and I'll start with what podcasters can take from this. And again, I think you have such a unique perspective from sitting on multiple sides with podcasting, TV, streaming, all of this. If you're a podcaster, if you're a creator, if you're a publisher, what would you take from this that would open up an opportunity for you, that would help you potentially monetize, that would help you grow an audience? What would open your eyes from this?
I think it's clear that not only that there's demand for television and film podcasts, but I believe there's going to be increasing demand as a result of the premium streamers, Netflix, and also Hulu. And I anticipate there are going to be more of them getting into the space, not only as producers and sponsors. Remember that Netflix, for the longest time, was a commissioner of podcasts. about their television show. They didn't air them on Netflix itself. They made them available through RSS feeds and other media. But now that, if you think of their announcement, the first partner was precisely Spotify and The Ringer. And within it, they had a number of shows about television and film, which isn't necessarily surprising. When, again, coming back to Hulu and Disney Plus, the first podcast was about a television show that they aired on Only Murders in the Building. HBO, for the longest time, had the shows available on HBO, but they're audio only. So it wasn't a behavior that a lot of people engaged with. As every premium streamer looks deeper into adding podcasts as a video category, I think creators of podcasts need to decide for them whether they want to turn their show into video or not. We have talked about it, about how audio or video comes with trade-offs. Not every show needs to have a video a component to be successful creatively or commercially. But if you do go into video, you need to think about the obviously the visual quality, the editing, the logo, the clearances, the rights, the clips. There are a number of little variables that or important variables that are much more likely to come at play when you decided to go into video, especially if you have the hope of being picked up by one of the premium streaming services that will pay or likely to pay a license fee in the future. So I do think there's a big opportunity. We were just at the beginning of this new wave of premium streamers getting into the podcast space, and I'm excited to see what comes next.
So I want to have you wear another hat now because you're talking to people in the streaming industry all the
Right.
time.
Mhm.
And, doing let's say a companion podcast, especially if you're not going to run advertising in it from other entities, is a cost, right?
Right.
Is Under what circumstances is it worth it? Is this something that you would recommend, and under what circumstances would you recommend it as a valuable addition to a streaming property?
Almost any circumstance, because remember that one of the biggest pain points that streamers have with this limited television series is that they'll make a season of 8 episodes and then the audience goes away for 9 months, 12 months. Sometimes there's 2 years between seasons. They're all trying to shrink the gap, but anything that can get the audience engaged and can give them more reasons to talk about the show to their friends is going to be something that will allow them to retain return viewers. One of the most difficult challenges of streaming is churn, right? That there's people cancel Netflix at a rate of 2% a month, and that's considered the industry best. Some services get 7, 8% monthly cancellation rate. So if you can get your 8% cancellation to even 4%, that extends the lifetime of the customer by double, and that creates significant enterprise value. So that's why there are budgets, and they've always been healthy budgets for production of podcasts about television shows.
It's funny you talk about churn with the streaming networks themselves,
Right,
but there's also show churn. And I remember
right.
when the show 24 aired with Kiefer
Mm-hmm.
Sutherland, and that show was eventually canceled. And the one of the biggest reasons why was the audience tailed off significantly from episode one as you went down because people would fall behind.
Right.
And
Yes.
they,
So I worked at Fox at the time. So, and the reason why that happened was that that show was on broadcast linear television. It predated the
right.
age of on demand and streaming. If that show had been on the air today, if you think about the premise of 24, in many respects, has been adapted on The Pit, the successful
Yeah.
HBO show, that live minute by minute tension that makes people really hang on to every minute, or adolescents on Netflix.
Yeah. And you can choose how you want to watch it. I mean, I have to think if 24 came out now, it
Right.
would be a very different story.
Hugely.
Especially with a companion podcast.
Right. I agree.
So anything else, or not? Any last words before we wrap things up here and send these good folks on their way?
I just want to thank you for always making every person in the podcast industry smarter, minute by minute, data point by data point, and doing it in a way that makes the whole industry grow. I commend what you and Brian have built, obviously now part of podcast movement. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this opportunity.
Absolutely. And where can people find out more about Owl and Company and Streamonomics?
Our website is owlandco.com. And Streamonomics, you can subscribe over there on the Insights page, and you can also follow me on LinkedIn.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Hernan. It's been a delight. It's been a pleasure getting to spend some more time with you again. And I hope that this has been a valuable way to spend an afternoon, a morning, or whenever you watch this. Thank you so much for the gift of your time and attention. And on behalf of all of us at Sounds Profitable, I'm Tom Webster. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Nice job. Good job by you.
All right, good job by you. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
How long was? Oh, wow, that was longer than I thought. Right.
Yeah, that's all right. We're gonna
Yeah.
we'll carve it up into some clips too, especially these video parts and drip it out. But I'm gonna write about this and we'll drop the whole thing on the in the newsletter on Wednesday.
Perfect. Okay.
Um,
Because what
and
you wrote on this Wednesday was a preview, right? Essentially an
correct.
announcement that's going to come. Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah. Just that it was going to come. So this Wednesday's article will be about this. We'll release the video, the report,
Okay.
and then we'll continue to kind of chop this up into some clips and things too. So, but you were great. I thought this went really well. It was
Thank
conversational.
you.
It was exactly what I hoped it would be.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't do this often, as you
Yeah,
know, right? I just don't, I don't know. I always feel strange about doing video in particular. But
I hate
yesterday I
video.
did an interview with a very specific podcast about streaming research called Ampere Analysis, the Ampere podcast.
Hmm.
So I know I need to do it more often.
Well, you have a good background. You got that set up really well. Your
Thank
rate the
you.
room is a 10.
It's
Uh,
my biggest this is the theater, right? Which is
yeah.
the one the best sound proofed room in the whole house. My only reservation is, does it convey just too much, luxury or privilege, or like that? That's my apprehension about it.
Mm,
But
I don't know. I mean,
anyway,
people are
there's always
building all kinds of fake studios. This at least looks like a place you live.
yeah, exactly. Yes, it's where I spend a lot of the evenings watching TV.
Yeah. So no,
Awesome.
I think it's great. So, all
Awesome.
right, I'll send you things in advance as we generate them, and thanks for this. This was
Great.
a real pleasure.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
All right.
Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers.